So, I'm Sheila Harper, and I'm here to talk to you today about abortion recovery with couples. Am I really loud? I probably don't even need this microphone. I got a loud mouth. And I'm protecting this cord. My battery went out this week, so it's like I don't even have a battery on this computer. So any little, if it just barely leaves the charge, it just goes blank and my whole computer shuts down. So, anyway, that's why I have this up here. I guess I actually could have printed off paper, but I never thought to hold actual paper in my hands because I do everything from this computer. So, is that good? Is there a problem? Am I good? Okay, awesome.
You can shout all you like.
Okay. Shout, really? Yeah. Okay. Well, I am thrilled to be here. I so believe in what Stacy is doing here, and I wanted to just tell you guys how honored I am to be here and be with y'all. I was telling Georgette earlier, I took a year and a half off, and this is like my first big travel outing again after I took a year and a half off to be with my husband as we planted a church in Nashville. So anyway, I'm glad to be back. I missed it so much. This issue, you guys know, once it gets in your blood, you can't not do it. You can't not be a part of this. But I usually don't go to conferences where I have to pay my own way. And I didn't mind paying my own way to this one because I so believe in what she's doing. And I'm not just saying this because she's here. She was, anyway. I really do believe in this because when we are united, we're so much more powerful than when I'm doing my thing in Nashville and Vicky's doing her thing in Milwaukee and Stacy's doing her thing in California, and I could just name all of you guys. We're so much more powerful when we come together like this and we learn from each other, we encourage each other, we glean things from each other. And some of this may be so elementary to you guys because you've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. But then some of it is like, I have a pastor friend who always says, eat the hay and leave the sticks. Take those nuggets, those morsels that you go, yeah, I've taken 3 pages of notes so far just from today. So take these things and go back and apply them to your own ministries as you go and do abortion recovery because we can all learn. None of us know it all, obviously, or we would be so much more powerful. But I'm telling you, united, we are so much better together than we are when we're all separated. It broke my heart when she said somebody didn't want to come because they just didn't want to be a part of this, and that's okay, but I'm just like, man, I wish everybody would just come together and forget about the religious differences and the denominational and theological differences. We're really all on the same team. I mean, when you think about it, we really are. I mean, I'm assuming everybody here wants to see abortion ended in our country and around our world, period. So when we come together like this, even if there is just 72 in here, you never know the power behind one person. So there's 72 one persons here, okay? So anyway, I don't have a really nice accent like Jenny. Obviously, I'm from the South, okay? Or I'm from Nashville. So you are going to have to put up with my accent. But anyway, I'm here to talk to you guys about abortion recovery with couples. And some of the things that I'm going to be telling you is probably going to sound crazy, and you're going to go, what in the world is she doing? But I'm just going to ask you to be open-minded as you're hearing these things. These aren't things just in theory that I'm going to be telling you. These are things that we actually do in SaveOne and have tremendous results. It really works. So I'm going to start out first with a personal story, or not about me, but kind of about me, but about a couple that we helped. My husband and I, when we first started the church, our church is just 4.5 years old. So when we first started the church, we had a couple, that came to our church occasionally. They would, come sporadic. Everybody knows people like that. They come to your church. You see them like every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks. And, church just isn't that big a deal to them to be at church. And that's okay. Eventually they get it. But anyway, this couple was like that. And we kind of knew. And we kind of had seen that they had a real volatile relationship, But they were so sweet and just such a cute little couple. They were probably, I would say they're in their early 30s. which is young to me. But so one day the girl's mother calls and says, "Oh my gosh, y'all really have to do something. They're in bad shape. It's really bad this time. Can y'all go over to their house?" And so we were like, "Well, sure. If it's really that bad, we'll go." And so my husband and I went over there, and I was in full pastor's wife mode. I wasn't even thinking about SaveOne. I was like, I'm pastor's wife. I'm going to go help with this marriage, And so we go, and we're sitting there, and my husband's leading the congregation, leading the discussion, and he's like, "Tell us what's going on. What are y'all doing?" And so they sit there, and I'm telling you, they sat there for 45 minutes bickering, and they would yell at each other so loudly at times that my husband would have to go, "Guys, guys," to yell and get their attention, and then they would stop, and look at him. But they were just it was just petty stuff. I can't even remember anything they were saying. It was just so ridiculous. All of the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I was sitting there quiet. And I mean, those of you who know me, I'm pretty patient, but after a while, it's like, okay, we got to do something different here. I have a degree in counseling, and what I'm about to tell you is not recommended counseling. This is not what they taught me in the books, okay? But I was sitting there, we sat there for 45 minutes. And these people kept bickering back and forth like that. And finally, I was like, "Just hang on a minute." I said, "I can't take this anymore." I said, I've been sitting here for 45 minutes listening to y'all, and I want to go out in the street and bang my head on the pavement. Like that. And they were both like, I shocked them so much because I was yelling at them. And so I went on, and I was like, "Just stop. It's like y'all are two old ladies just back and forth, back and forth." So finally, I finally calmed down, and we're all like, just looking at each other. It was like this long, awkward moment, And so as I'm sitting there, I'm trying to get calmed down, And I'm sitting there, and it's like the Holy Spirit starts saying, "You know what? There's a root here." And as I sat there and I was watching them, and they didn't know what to say, and it was like we were at a, gunslinger, like we're just standing there looking at each other, like who's going first? And we were sitting there, and the Holy Spirit just started dealing with me. "Ask them. Just ask them." And I was like, oh, how you start arguing, "Oh, I can't ask them that. We're not even talking about abortion. I'm a pastor's wife." And I'm going back and forth like that in my mind. And so finally, as we sat there, I said, "Guys, I just have a question to ask you." And it was real serious. I mean, it was just so thick in that room. I said, "I've got a question to ask you guys." And I said, "It's so personal. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. But I'm just going to ask you." And they were like, "Okay." And I said, "Do you or you, or both of you, have an abortion in your past?" And at that moment, she just looked at him. She would not look away. She wouldn't look at me or Jack. She was just looking at him. And I tell you what, I will never forget this. His face went from being serious and, overcoming all this that they were doing, to shock, to relief, and then utter, just absolute torment. It was like his whole face just melted to the point where he started sobbing. Tears were dripping off his chin. And we just sat there in silence for a long time. It brings up a lump in my throat thinking about that guy to this day. The way that he had kept that for so many years inside him. And then the way his wife was acting, showing no emotion, just sitting there staring at him. She was so terrified. And so after he gathered himself a little bit, my husband said, tell us about it. He knew we had hit on something big. He said, "Tell us about it." And so he started to tell the story of how she had a young son at that time from a previous marriage. And so before they got married, she got pregnant. and he talked her into having an abortion. He was like, it's no big deal. We don't want to start the family with another child, and we've got the rest of our life to have children. You know, that's like famous last words. And so she listened to him and went and had the abortion. And of course, that was the absolute root. She blamed him. He felt terrible. He was mad at her. He was constantly on the defensive. He was a workaholic, had pent-up anger issues. I mean, it was like just the typical, you could see the symptoms. After I knew what was going on, you could so see everything that was happening with him. So as we sat there, then I went into full SaveOne mode, and I was ready to do whatever it took to help them. And so I offered to meet with them once a week, every week for the next however long it took, and they were all over it. They were like, yes, we've got to have some help. And so I took the men's curriculum and the women's curriculum. They mirror each other, so it's real easy for a man and woman to go through the class together. I'll get to that in a minute. But I sat in their little breakfast table for the next 8 weeks, and I met with this couple, and they were so wonderful. And it was an amazing transformation. Seeing this man and woman work through this problem, which was the root of all their problems, all the years of the volatility and the bickering and everything back and forth, they finally had a place to put it, to deal with it, for God to dissolve it and dispel it from their marriage. So that was one of the first times, not the first time, but one of the times that I went through the SaveOne curriculum with a couple. And it's an absolute beautiful process. There have been many, many other couples that have gone through SaveOne, and I'm sure with you guys as well, that you see that marriage be held together because they're able to work through the pain together. Whether or not they were both involved in the abortion, like this couple was, or one of them had had the abortion and the other one had had to deal with it all these years. I'll never forget helping a couple who had been married like probably 2 decades. Well, for 15 years, he had to deal with this woman's abortion that he had married. He knew about the abortion, but they were never allowed to talk about it. They were never allowed to tell anybody outside the family. It was like she was on this emotional roller coaster and didn't know what to do about it, didn't want to talk about it. And I will never forget, he said 2 words to me. He said, for 15 years, I have been nothing but collateral damage. And I have always remembered that. How many times have couples come together and one of them feels like collateral damage because of a choice they had nothing to do with? They didn't even know the person when that choice was made lots of times. So to just feel like that collateral damage, you have to think about when, like Stacy was saying earlier, it's not just a woman's issue, it's a man's issue, it's a couple's issue, it's a family crisis. So when you look at the whole picture, you have to minister to all those people, not just the one person that made the choice. If it's a couple, then they both have the problem, not just one of them. It's both of them, whether they were both involved in the process at all. So anyway, I'm going to be giving you 6 keys to successful ministry to couples after abortion, okay? And some of this, like I said, is going to be so elementary to y'all, but I'm telling you, it actually works. So let me share with you just some quick statistics. These are from Terry Reiser of the Right to Life League of Southern California. And she says, and I'm going to give you a lot of numbers, so if you want this later, I can get it to you or whatever, but it says a study of women in a post-abortion support group at the Medical College of Ohio found that only 7 out of 66 women who had abortions while single eventually married the father. How many of those relationships, I wonder, were supposed to happen, but because abortion was let in, didn't happen? And all the things that we're all missing from our lives now because those couples did not get together in the long run. Another study found that only 19% of women who had an abortion were living with the father in the years following the abortion. In a study of 100 women carried out by the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, 75 of those 100 women were married or in committed relationships. 46%, so almost half of those 100 women, agreed that the abortion provoked a major crisis in their lives, which was frequently followed by an unstable marital or social relationship. And in a survey of 75 men questioned months and even years after they accompanied their partners to an abortion clinic, 25% felt the abortion contributed to the breakup of the relationship. So absolutely, this is a family crisis. From siblings to aunts to uncles to grandparents, everybody. But we're going to talk specifically about couples. There are ways to combat this. There are ways that we can involve the husband and the wife in this process. And I hope that you guys will hear my passion and that you'll take it back home with you. But first of all, the very first one, and we've hit on it so many times already here, and I'm so happy. Every time somebody mentions it, I'm like, that's part of my dog. This is great. But the first one is we have to change our thinking. We have to change our thinking. This is not a woman's issue. We cannot let those words come out of our mouth anymore. Ever, ever, ever. And when you start to have that thought, take it captive and make sure that you kick that thinking out of your mind. Because I have said for years, it's like it was a light bulb that dawned on me one day. The other side was absolutely ingenious. And a lot of people may not like what I'm about to say, but they were ingenious in taking the leaders of our homes out of the equation. And they left the weaker vessel, the word says we're the weaker vessel. They left the weaker vessel standing there vulnerable and on our own to deal with this. And they made the men, they indoctrinated our society. And they made the men think they cannot say anything, they cannot touch our body, it's our choice, it's our right. And you can't say a word. That's what they made these men think. And who was it up here earlier that said we emasculated men by doing that? And then here we are like, okay, we want somebody to help us make this decision. But so many times there have been men who come through the SaveOne study that said, I didn't feel like I could say anything. I didn't feel like I had a right to say anything. When he wanted to protect his family, but yet he couldn't. So we have to bring men back into this. We have to welcome them back into this issue and back into the debate because we need their voice. We need your voice, men. Amen. We want you to speak. We want you back. Even women who don't even know it yet, they're going to be happy when men come back in this equation. Because I'm so tired of hearing that, and let me just tell you something. This wears me out. I know this has happened at least 36 times, which may not seem like a lot to you, but it's way too many times to me. A man will call the SaveOne office, or we'll get an email from him or something. We're in Tennessee. He may be in Idaho, and he'll say, I went to my local pregnancy center, and I was going to volunteer, and they said they didn't have anything for me. And I'm like, really? Seriously? Are you kidding me? That it's so frustrating because I'm like, there is a prime opportunity for you. I mean, even if he's just there to answer the phone, give him something. Bring him in and start to train him and let him be around and welcome him back in. Or they will call the pregnancy centers, and I'm sorry, I'm on pregnancy centers, but that's what they always say. I called the pregnancy center. Or they've called the pregnancy center and asked for abortion recovery help. Just poured out their heart and said, I need help, and I don't know where else to turn. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any help for men. I'm like, I want to pick my jaw up off the floor and say, what in the world is happening here? Even if you don't know what to do, just say, come on, we'll work this out together. We'll figure it out.
Sheila, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I want you guys to write down the name of an organization right now before I forget. My brain's kind of crazy right now. It's called Guys for Life. It's run by a man named Kurt Ramspot. He runs a whole ministry on how to help you start men's programs in your center.
Oh, that's
All
good.
he does. All right? You get the men in your center, you familiarize them, you call Sheila, and you get her men's program, or Linda Cochran's men's program, or Warren Williams' men's program, or hopefully some men will actually write a program. I'm really sick and tired of women writing them. But anyway, you get the point. Guys for Life, Kurt is a very good base foundation for your men's program. If you don't have one, you call him. He was going to come and he couldn't. It's kind of like his 15th child this last. But anyway, Guys for Life, Kurt Ramspot. Tell him you heard about him at the Share Symposium. Call him because, like Sheila says, there's no excuse for us not to have men's programs.
What was his
You
name?
can't get pregnant by yourself.
Guys for Life with Kurt
Guys for-
Ramspot.
Yeah, guysforlife.org.
Everybody got that? Everybody hear that?
Sorry, Sheila.
That's great. That's a great idea. So anyway, does everybody get that? That's the first thing we have to do is change our thinking. And number two, when we change our thinking, our speech will naturally follow. Words are so important. Somebody said up here earlier, the power of life and death are in our tongue. Seriously. We can bring life to something or we can kill something.
That's right.
And if we're constantly saying we help women, we help women, we help women, we help women, what does that say to men? What are those words that men are hearing? There's no place for me there. I can't go there. I wouldn't be welcome there. There are men haters there, you know? So change your speech to say we have programs for men and women. Oh, men and women come in all the time. We have a class that's starting next fall for men and women. I mean, just men and women, men and women, men and women. That may seem so elementary to y'all, but I'm telling you, when you start saying men and women, when you start changing the materials that you're handing out and they say men and women, it's going to raise the awareness and it's going to pique the interest of people. They're going to start asking, like, really? You help men at your pregnancy center? You know, people wouldn't naturally think that. But when you change your speech to say everything that you say, everything that comes out of your mouth is open and welcoming to men, then you're going to change the dynamic of your community and the dynamic around your center, and you're going to make a place where the men's voice, our leaders' voices are heard and are welcome. So make sure that you change that speech. And then look around in your office. Like, sit there in your office and think, okay, if I was a man, would I feel comfortable here? You know, is it all candles and potpourri and pink walls? No. Pastor Eric is saying, no, I would not feel comfortable there with potpourri. So look around and see, like, is this gender neutral? Are the products that you put out, did they have a man's face and a woman's face? I mean, little changes like that are subtle, but they speak volumes when you include the men in everything that you're doing and make sure your materials are saying that to the world. So change your thinking and then change your speech. And then make sure your staff, if you're a director or if you're a pastor or whatever at your church, make sure your staff changes their speech to say men and women, men and women. And then before you know it, nobody's going to think that's weird because it's just going to be commonplace that you help men and women because you've been saying it for 2 or 3 years. So new people that come in, they just know we help men and women. So have I said that enough times? Like, you've got that in your mind? It took me forever to stop saying pheromones. I just kept wanting to say pheromones after Vicki was up here. I like that word. Sorry, I just go off sometimes. So, thirdly, and this is the kind of out there thing that I want y'all to, like, don't just like slam the doors shut when I say it. Just keep your mind open. Thirdly, when helping couples, be open and suggest that the husband or wife come through the abortion recovery program with their spouse. That is an absolutely amazing thing to see and to watch. How this kind of first came about was when I first started SaveOne, and I feel so stupid saying this now, but all we helped was women. And probably for 2 years, I never even had the thought to help men. I don't know why, I just didn't. It was just all about women. And so for 2 years, I had just been teaching this little Bible study at my church. We weren't even starting chapters or anything like that, or had branched out at all. And this man came up to me and asked if he could go through the women's program. And I was like, really? I kind of looked at him like, I was like, I'm not going to tell him no. I'm not going to tell him I'm not going to help him. But there had been so many women go through the program and then go back into the church, and they were talking about it, and he knew he needed healing, so he was like, well, I'll try that. It was the only thing he had ever heard of. So I was like, sure. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that was wrong, I have all these really smart pro-life friends that have all these initials after their name, and when I say that, they're like, you did what? You let a man come into the women's class. But I was like, sure, come on. Well, as soon as he said he would come, he said, can I bring my wife? And then I was like, well, I guess. And he said she wasn't involved in the abortion at all. This was like way back in his college days, and it was actually an abortion that he found out after the fact, and he was devastated over it. And so he knew that he was carrying this baggage. They were about to have children, and he didn't want to take a chance on relaying that baggage to his kids. I thought that was so wise. So I said, well, sure, come on, So they show up, and it's this one man and 9 women. And so I'm like, we're going to have class. So we sit down and, we go through the whole SaveOne study, week after week, and it just worked. It was amazing. And when I look back on it, I'm so glad I didn't know what I was doing, because God had to show up. How many times do we have our way of doing things? Like what Jenny was saying earlier, like we know how to do it, and this is the way we do it. And any variation from that, it must not be right. But a lot of times when you just like step out there in faith, God always shows up and does his thing. And I love that. Apart from us, in spite of us, a lot of times. So anyway, they come through there. The wife, first of all, had such a stigma and didn't even really realize that she had been so judgmental toward those women who had abortions, because she only knew about her husband's pain, and she couldn't stand the girl who went behind his back. So it was like she had this, this bitterness almost attached to women who had abortions. So for her to sit in that class, her eyes were so opened to the pain that girl she knew must have been suffering. And so she was so enlightened as to what really was happening after an abortion with these women. And then, of course, he was so just incredible. He showed the other side of the equation, the other side of the coin. It was like those women just so related to him and the things that he said. And they all went through the class with flying colors. It was absolutely phenomenal. And I was like, that was awesome, when we got through. And I knew from that point on, I'll do that anytime anybody wants to, because it was just so beautiful what God did in that class. So a couple of years later, they get transferred to Slovenia over in Europe. He starts SaveOne Europe. And now there are chapters all across Europe because of his and his wife's efforts. They then got moved to China. And he turned over the reins to a leader in Austria, and now she's running SaveOne Europe and rocking and rolling. And so they moved to China for 3 years, and now we have 2 chapters in China. All because I didn't know what I was doing. And God did. One person, guys, one person. And like I said, there's 72 one-persons in this room. I know that's not proper English, but it sounds good. So, anyway, when they moved to China, they raised up leaders in China, started 2 chapters. They've got a waiting list, these 2 chapters do. They're trying to train new leaders and get new people. And I got to Skype. They surprised the girls at the first night of honor. We call it a night of honor. We don't call it a memorial service. But at the first night of honor in China, I got to Skype. I stayed up in the middle of the night and sat there in front of this computer waiting, until till I knew the night of honor was ready, and then they turned me on, and I got to Skype in China with the first China graduates of SaveOne. It was incredible. I could hardly even talk. I was just crying and so proud of y'all. And, it was just a great thing. But it all goes back to allowing that couple to go through the SaveOne class. It wasn't anything magical I did or the fact that I said yes or anything. It was God. We have to let God out of the little bitty box because He can do abundantly more than we can ever ask or imagine. So most of the time we limit Him by our own imaginations because we think we know the magnitude of what He can do. So don't ever limit God by your imagination. Know that He can do far more than what you can think or what you can even ask. So just tell Him that you're open. Pray those couples in to your class. And then fourth, and this is just kind of a thing that we do that just kind of encompasses the whole couple, and I can send you guys a copy of this. I can email it to you while we're here. If anybody wants it, just let me know. But if we invite that spouse to the class, and they're like, well, I don't want to go to that class. A lot of times they're like, why would I want to go to that class? Because they don't really see the need for it. But I will tell you, one time we, and I'm sure this has happened more than once, a woman was so messed up, and it was causing such a problem in their marriage. She was totally transformed. We stuck her back into the marriage, and the man was so resentful. He was like, why hadn't you been like this the last, 2 decades? And he was so, and then we had all that to deal with. So if he had been allowed to go through the class, it would have been so much better because they see each other's healing, they see each other's vulnerability, they see what each other needs to heal, and it's just a beautiful process. But if that man or woman does not want to go through the class with their spouse, which is okay, don't pressure them or make anybody feel bad if they say no, we send home what we call a husband letter. Has anybody ever used that, a husband letter? Or if we're sending it to a man, we call it the wife letter. We just change pronouns. But the husband letter just simply says, dear Jack, or whatever, Sheila is going to be going through a pretty intense Bible study. And it's like you just kind of explain. She's going to need your encouragement. She's going to need you to be patient. And she's going to be dealing with this and this. And, and it's just like a one-page letter that just kind of involves him in the situation or involves her into the situation. And a lot of times, once you send that letter home, they come to the class because it's like that's an open invitation. It opens the door for them, and then they're like, wow, they really do want me to be involved. That wasn't just a cordial little invitation. They really want me. And so that husband letter is a great way to just include the whole couple. Does that make sense? So if anybody wants that, just let me know. And then fifth, never give advice to one person that you couldn't give to the couple. In other words, like, for example, I had a girl one time that kept telling me during the class, I feel like God's telling me that I need to get in touch with my ex-boyfriend to apologize for the abortion. And she was married. And there was no way I could say, well, if God told you to, think about how that could get turned around on you. She would go home, her husband would get mad. Why did you get in touch with him? Well, Sheila said, And you don't want that kind of liability on you for one thing, but you always want to give advice to that person sitting there like you're giving advice to the whole couple. Don't ever take one side of the story and make a determination from it. Because I don't care how clear cut it seems, there's always two sides to every story. Always, always, always. Don't ever think you know the whole story when you're just hearing one side. So if you give advice or counsel or anything, make sure you're giving it like the man and the woman are both sitting there. So that way, for one, you are always encompassing that whole couple, but for another thing, you don't have one of the spouses saying, well, I don't want you to go back to that class because she told you, and you're not driving any type of wedge in there that you may totally be unaware of, that you may be drawing into that marriage. So make sure that the advice or counsel that you give is always to both of them, not just to one of them. And what I always do is I try to back everything up with Scripture. I don't give any advice or counsel unless I can somehow show Bible for it. Because that way you've always got that to fall back on. Or my typical response is, you know what? You need to go home and get on your face about that. Because if it's something that I feel a little like, I don't know how your wife would feel about that. I don't know how your husband would feel about that. I don't ever say, yeah, go for it, or anything. You just always want to be cognizant that you are dealing with a marriage here, not just one person, okay? And then sixth, and this is so obvious, but so many times we save prayer as a last resort. We have our way we do stuff, we have our routine, we have our outlines, we have our programs, and then when we see something going wrong, we're like, oh, we need to pray. Or I hate it when people go, well, all we can do now is pray. Like that's the last thing we do. When that has to be the first thing we do, the very first thing we do, before we even start advertising our classes or doing anything like that, pray, pray, pray. There is so much spiritual warfare that surrounds this ministry. As many of you know, Stacy for sure, there is so much spiritual warfare because abortion is an inroad to every facet of our lives. It's not just our marriages, it's our families, it's our kids, it's our church service, it's our leadership, it's our futures, it's everything, every facet of our life. Satan has a hook in if abortion is involved. So he hates it when we start pulling those inroads and we're like, yeah, we're getting rid of that one and we're getting rid of that one. He hates it. And so he starts just jacking up everything so we can't do what God has called us to do. Yeah. So you have to have, think of prayer as like the yellow brick road. Like you're paving that yellow brick road before you ever walk down it. Put that prayer at the top of the list. And make sure that you're praying with your staff, that you're praying with everybody involved, that you have somebody praying for you during every single class. We have people that when we hold SaveOne at our church, that like from 6:30 to 8:30, they're at home praying for us. And they're not even involved in the class. Just make sure you have this thing covered in prayer. Because we're literally moving people out of his camp, the enemy's camp, and moving them into God's camp. And transforming their lives in the process. So with 50 plus million abortions having happened in this country, which we all know it's much more than that, but I believe it is the greatest problem that's facing our families and our marriages today. And if he can break up the marriage, he can break up several generations after that. You guys know that divorce, it's a multifaceted effect that it has on families. Those of you who have been through it, you've lived it, you've seen it. It doesn't mean that God can't continue to bless you or anything like that. I don't mean that, but you just know the effect, the ripple effect that divorce and breakups like that have on a family. So if we can save those marriages by getting abortion recovery into there, think about the amount of divorces that have happened because of abortion. That couple that I told you about at the beginning, they would probably be divorced by now had we not gotten to the root of the problem. God had a plan for them, and he showed us the root. It wasn't like me and Jack or anything, but it was just like he had a plan for them, and he saved their marriage. So we have to give these couples hope when they seem to have no hope. They're coming to you to help build their faith and help them believe again in their dream. When a couple gets married, you think you're going to live happily ever after. It's always going to be wedded bliss. You never dream that you're going to be dragging an abortion 20 years down the road and the aftermath of the abortion into your marriage. You just always think it'll work out. But they are coming to you to give them faith and hope again that this can work and they can be happy and have joy again. In the New Living Translation, Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when dreams come true, there is life and joy." And that's what I believe abortion recovery is to this couple. It is hope and joy in their life again. Their hope has been deferred and their hearts are sick right now. But when they got married, they had a dream, and their dream now is to be well again, to get off that roller coaster of emotion. Because nobody likes that, being up 1 minute and down and on this emotional roller coaster. But they want to stop living in defeat and being reminded of this choice. So when this dream comes true, life and joy comes back into their marriage and into their lives. So now, I know I've laid a lot of information on you, and maybe a lot that has stretched you a little bit, or, thinking about having men and women in the class together. So I wanted to give you a minute to ask some questions or give some comments if any of you have done that and had victories with it or anything like that. Stacey?
Can you tell briefly and abortion recovery leaders who are using typical curriculums will understand what I'm going to ask you to do, but your schedule, because you do break the men and women up at different times during the study.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of our chapters do, some don't.
Okay.
I mean, each chapter is different.
Can you give a little synopsis of
Mm-hmm.
that? So, because the way you're speaking, it sounds like the men are going through the whole thing, and I know you do have those that do break it
Mm-hmm.
up for people that may be a little apprehensive.
Yes. Well, some of the chapters, and like we have chapters all over the world, and we hold them very loosely. They're under the pastor's care or the pregnancy center's care. So each chapter kind of does things differently. So we hear about, wow, they did it like this, or they did it like this. And I will tell you, some of the chapters do break, like they'll come together, they'll tell their stories, that type of thing. They bond, they see the other couples. Or sometimes it's just like 1 or 2 couples, and then it'll be 4 or 5 women by themselves. It's a different dynamic every time. But a lot of times that leader's husband or that leader's wife or whatever will be in the ministry with them, and they will break off with the men and go through the men's study for several chapters. Mainly, we have 2 chapters that are dealing with emotions, anger and sorrow and shame and guilt and those types of things. But a lot of times they will deal with that separately and then come back together toward the end when you're talking about your child and talking about a man or woman of courage, which are the ending chapters. So a lot of times they will break off and do men's things separately and women's things separately and then come back together. But each week they all have homework and they have to go home and do the Bible study. The SaveOne studies, they gel so well together because they mirror each other. So you're literally like on the same page, and it's easy for a man and woman to go through the class together. The only chapter that's different is the last chapter, and the one is a woman of courage, and one is a man of courage. And we use Esther and David as our examples of a woman of courage and a man of courage. And like that week's homework after the class is through is to go out and find somebody else who needs abortion recovery and bring them in. So, is that what you're, yes?
When you do break them apart, do you separate the husband and wife?
Yes.
Even though she's not post-abortive, maybe he's
Mm-hmm.
post-abortive, she's not.
Yes.
So is the homework like going into detail about abortion experience? Maybe she won't be able to relate to.
Well, you discuss when you come back together, or when you come back the next week, I should say, you discuss that chapter, and they have gone home and worked the chapter together. So it's like she can talk about his grief or how it has affected their marriage, or, it always works because there's always something to talk about. When she has that out, when she has that open road to be able to talk about what she's dealt with his abortion all these years, she has something to talk about. Because, and too, they've worked that homework together during the week. Yes, Pastor?
That's one of the things that we do is we run them together. They're not together, but they run along side by side.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we do is, in the instances where only one of the spouse comes, we encourage them to go home and share what they're learning in the group.
Oh, that's good.
And oftentimes that does create an incentive. Oftentimes we find that there's an abortion on the other side as well.
Wow.
And what we do is we bring them together in our close to the end service.
Mm-hmm.
We bring them together in the ceremony, so
Yes.
they're all together. All the men and women are together for
Mhm.
the final.
We do that too at the end. That's always a beautiful thing when they come through, You know, a lot of times they will say that they're adopting that child and, you know, give that child his last name, or, you know, and it's real special to do that type of thing. Yes?
We have always encouraged men, couples, whatever, and it's really helped a lot. They come and we don't separate them for anything. We do a weekend retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And we found that women who on Friday when they show up, and what's that man doing here?
Yeah.
By Sunday, she's gotten such healing just by hearing him and his story, and it just brings healing all the way around.
Yes,
Healing
it's
that probably
great.
wouldn't occur if they weren't healed.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It so shows the other side. And I have seen so many times it tenders their heart because they're like, oh my gosh, he may be suffering like that, you know, and they're able to pray for him or pray for her when before they had such animosity.
And before that, the woman, like you said, had a lot of animosity towards men in general. They never even thought that a man could feel that way.
Yes, exactly. And Bill?
Sheila, 15 years ago, I had a vasectomy, and my wife at the time asked me to do that as a method of birth control because she was having such problems with things like the pill, making her so sick. And I went to one of the foremost doctors in our town in Oklahoma, Norman, Oklahoma. It's a university town, OU's there. And this was foremost doctor, most professional, beautiful offices and everything. And the surgery was an abortion in the fullest extent of it for what a man could experience, to me. And it was something that was evil, and that spirits actually came down into that operating theater while I was there. It was one of the darkest, most evil times of my entire life. But afterwards, these professional people left me slaughtered. They left me covered in blood. And at the end of it, I mean, they're looking at me with demonic stares and glares. At the end of the surgery, they just stood there looking at me, demonized. And then they said, you can get up now and go.
Oh, goodness.
And I'm looking at myself covered in blood. And I said, well, what do you mean? Aren't you going to clean me up? They said, well, there's a bathroom over there and there's some paper towels in there. And it was dark and
Wow.
deep. And there ought to be some kind of a way for men that have been through something like this to come, when you have this moniker on all of your recovery programs that just says this is abortion. I think there's other aspects that need to be pulled in here and have healed. And have counseling for. And I've never received any kind of counseling.
Maybe you need to write a men's study.
Pray about that and think about it and see what there is that you can come up with.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I have some men that speak with me when we go out to recovery programs and churches that have a certain amount of post-abortion healing. But when I've met with them and talked to them about going through a study like this, they go, we don't want to fill out a workbook. We don't like, reading workbooks and filling in the blanks. Do you have anybody got any ideas on?
Well, I have had men say that. I had one guy, I don't know if you guys know him, Mark Morrow. He found me on the internet and he was like, he called me and he's like, I've been through every study. None have helped me. I mean, it was like, that was the way the conversation went. I found you and I'll try it, but I doubt it'll work. I mean, it was like just, and I just hung up feeling terrible. Like, okay, well, I'll send you the study. But so I sent him the men's study, and I never heard from him again. So I opened the door for him to talk to our man on staff. He'll talk to you. We'll help you. All this thing. I never heard from him again. So he calls me up probably 3 months later or so, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Nashville. I'm that guy you talked to, and I was wondering if you'd meet me for pancakes one morning for breakfast." And so I'm like, imagine me going to my husband, "Hey, I met this guy on the internet, and he wants to meet for breakfast. That's okay, right?" No. So my husband went with me after I talked to Mark for a while, and I'm like, okay, I think he really is legit. So we meet for pancakes, me and my husband and him and his daughter. And by then, I had told him I was a huge Monkees fan, but that's aside. I'll tell you about that in just a second. So I love Davy Jones. I was so sad. All my friends were texting me when he died. Did you hear Davy Jones died? But anyway, so I met him for breakfast, and while we were sitting there, the whole time he had his book, like the SaveOne men's study, sitting on the table. And so finally we eat and everything, and I was wondering why we just had small talk. And finally he was like, okay, they cleared away the plates and everything, and he was like, okay, I got something to tell you. And I said, what? He goes, this is the greatest study I've ever had in my entire life. And he said, I even have journal pages in the men's study. So, that's really stretching it. So, and I encouraged him, journal, men journal. You can write down a few sentences, get it out of your head, it helps, it's therapeutic. So anyway, he gave me his book, and he was like, here, I just want you to have that book. And those books are like, I never look at anybody's book. That's your stuff. I don't want to get in your space, your personal business. But he gave me that book, and he said, use it. Use it to help people. Anything you find in there, just use it. And now he's like going all over the place, speaking. He started a ministry, speaking about abortion and all this kind of stuff. But when you look through his book, I finally got my nerve up. I felt so invasive opening that book and looking through it. But the first journal page, it has like 3 lines, and then at the end, it's written up the sides and across the top, and every bit of journal information is completely full. So it's like when you can encourage them to just try it, if that's all you have, there may be a man that writes a study that a man can more relate to. But if that's all you've got, just encourage them. Just try it. Just do it. It's not anything the SaveOne book does. It's literally just getting them back to the Word of God. That's what does the healing, not SaveOne. So it's literally just doing that. So if they're comfortable looking up the scriptures, answering a few questions, that type of thing, it'll work because it's just God's Word.
Okay,
So-
something else to write down. Healed by a snake. Thomas Golden. Swallowed by a snake. Sorry, swallowed by a snake. Thomas Golden. Amazing counselor that Vicki has had at 2 or 3 of her different conferences.
It's called Swallowed by a Snake by Thomas Golden. And I remember him. He was out there in San Francisco, wasn't he? He was great. Go ahead, Vicki.
Back on that, my table back is stuff from Healing Vision. Tom Golden was one of the people at Healing Vision, so there is one of his sections.
Oh, good.
People, specifically talking about abortion stuff. So if people were interested in that, they can go
Yes.
to that website.
Oh, that is great because I remember just hanging on his every word. It was so much incredible information about men and abortion recovery. So look him up and read about him and all the work that he's done. Yes?
You talked a lot about the spouse who has not had the abortion, but how they're affected within the relationship of the marriage.
Yes.
Does the SaveOne actually address some of the things they go through, or
No.
not? Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But somehow it works. It's really just God's
Okay.
Word. Seriously, it's just God's Word. It does not address their problems and what they've had to deal with as the collateral damage, but what it does is it draws them into their spouse's healing.
Right. So they
And they I don't want to say enjoy. What's the word I'm looking for? They
intimacy.
are, it's like it becomes a very intimate and they heal together type of thing, if that makes sense.
They empathize.
Yes, they empathize. Pastor?
I just want to say one more thing as far as what this lady was saying over here. We use your study, the men's study, because there are a lot of studies out there, but we use it because of its simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've tried other studies that are full of scripture, that are all this, they got to do all this and this, and men typically don't relate to that. But yours is very simple. I don't mean that as an insult, but
No,
it's
I
very easy
agree.
for men to use. And if you substitute the word journal for just take some notes, it
Oh,
does
that's
wonders.
good. That's good. No pages.
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to change that
I
when we
was
do
gonna say, you should change
another
that.
revision, like put note pages at the top. So anybody else? I think we're out of time,
Thomas
aren't we?
Golden's focus is that men grieve through action. and taking notes and building memorials and doing some amazing things. And he traveled the world to analyze men in their grief. Please make a note of buying that book. It's sticky stuff, but it will give you a totally different perspective on men in the grief process, not just as it relates to abortion, but the loss of a spouse or a grandparent or whatever. So men's grief in general, it's a really, really good book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yes.
Study or the
Sorry, say that again.
what is the name of the tools or the study?
A SaveOne.
How do we
One's
get
the
it?
SaveOne the men's study, and one's SaveOne the women's study. It's real different.
SaveOne.org.
SaveOne.org.
Her website should be in your program for description.
So, yes.
Do you have anything on how you facilitate couples? Because there really is a huge need.
Yes.
I found that in the last, one of the studies I had where one of the clients had 5 abortions with her spouse, and there was a lot of anger. Praise God, she came through the healing, and as she was coming through her healing, her husband was getting healed simultaneously. It's just that he didn't have anywhere to, the outlet other than what he was seeing his wife go through.
Yeah.
And they were able to work through it through prayer because he had, he was a pretty foundationally on the Word of God and so forth.
Mhm.
So do you have anything, because I think it's great, I think it's awesome, I really do appreciate it.
Mhm. We don't have any printed materials. I just always go more in depth with it in our all-day training that we do.
Okay.
That's it, I'm
In
sorry.
Nashville?
No, I travel all
Oh,
over
okay.
and train people, so. Mhm. Anybody else? Well, thank you. This has been fun. Thanks.